the YouTube viewers. Hello, welcome everyone. Hi, welcome to the Emu War history lecture. Today we are going to be learning about the wonderful, wacky, strange, unusual event in Australian history known as the Emu War. If you're not aware of what the Emu War is, don't worry. The internet has you covered. As you may have already heard about it through memes or videos or, various different YouTube channels. Just a heads up for people who are squeamish about the Emu War. There will be images of emus being killed. There will be footage of guns being fired at emus, including dead emus. Not many. But if you are squeamish about that sort of thing, I figured I should give you a heads up. Just in case you are squeamish about animals being killed or slaughtered. Because, there are people who may be sensitive about that sort of thing. I know, like, when I watch nature documentaries, I don't really like seeing the small, cute creatures getting eaten by the big predators, because it makes me sad. And also, this book here is a comedy. It's sort of like a parody book by J.A. Bryden, who wrote about the emu perspective of the Emu War in a parody satirical book, if you are interested in reading about this book. It's the greatest book cover you've ever seen. Yeah, you'll see a lot of that. There's a lot of various different things such as this, because Australians love to make fun of each other. Including, stupid events from history. So, also a thing to be aware of, there's a lot of issues with the Emu War. We only have like a handful of sources, of which I think most are in this presentation. Okay, my phone is for some reason listening to me. There's a lot of issues with reliability with regards to these sources. Also, first-hand accounts tend to be, let's say, less than trustworthy, because there is agendas and, let's say, basically just like, hey, people want this thing to be seen as a good thing, so, they may be embellishing or lying a bit about what happened. So research about this event is just kind of like an absolute disaster. We have very little modern scholarship because it's such an insignificant event in history. There's like one modern journal article, which is essentially the cornerbed of all modern discourse about the cornerstone of basically all modern discourse about the Emu War. And it was written in 2006. It's by, let me go get the article name. It's basically the primary source for pretty much everyone who's ever done anything regarding the Emu War. The Wikipedia article mentions it very heavily. Let me just go try and find can my cursor appear, please? Sorry, I had my cursor disappear. It's called Feathered Foes, Soldier Settlers and the Western Australia's Emu War of 1932. It's by Murray Johnson. It was in the Journal of Australian Studies, Volume 30, Issue 88, if you are interested in looking up that. So yeah, it's very much like an issue with reliable sources. People have different agendas, and just like, it's such an insignificant event that, there's not really that much historical data or historical information that we can really rely on. And then finally, another thing is that, I've gone back, Larrikin culture, which is something that we'll explain a little bit earlier, a bit later, I should say, is that Australians love to joke. They love to make fun of things. They love to embellish stories. They love to have a joke and have a laugh. And maybe you may know the reputation of Australians as being not very serious, being jokesters, being, let's say, to use some modern vernacular on the internet, shit posters. things like the drop bears, etc., etc. Actually, drop bears are very real. That's kind of the main sort of thing that is propagating the emu war to the internet. So it's very difficult to research the emu war in a serious manner. But if you're into learning about the emu war casually, don't worry, the internet has you covered because the internet loves to make fun of people, including Australia. So it turns out that if you are aware of the emu war, it is probably through the internet. This is probably how you learnt about the emu war, is through YouTube videos or perhaps like posts on the internet, on Twitter, on Reddit, on, I don't know, web boards of other places. It's a meme, yes. It's become a meme. It's a phenomenon on the internet. There's, you know, countless videos on YouTube. A lot of them use AI-generated thumbnails. You've got shitposts like, this is a time-lapse of the emu war, because obviously people like doing time-lapse videos, so you have emu-infested area, and then Australian territory. You know, that one was actually quite funny. There's all sorts, but yeah, basically, you can see that most of these videos are not very long, because the topic is really not that big or serious, but, you know, obviously there has become the joke of Australia went to war with emus and lost. Well, we'll find out if that's true or not. Yes, John Cleese is making a film about the emu war. It hasn't entered production yet. But speaking of emu war films, there's actually also an emu war film already out. It's a very small, low budget comedy film involving a lot of different Australian small actors and comedians from last year. A real B-grade film, yeah. The fun thing about it is that it was paid for by the Australian government. They supported the production of it, so it's quite funny. It's very, very silly. Very, very silly film. Oh, let me just mute. Sorry, I'm gonna have to turn off alerts just in case. But thank you everyone for following. Thank you for the support and subscribers earlier. I'll just have them disabled for the time being. Just for the sake of the lecture. Who greenlit the funding? I don't know. Screen Australia, I think, is the body, the government body that helps support the industry. It's very silly. There's trailers on YouTube if you want to watch it. But yeah, there's basically it's just a whole massive joke, which, you know, it's fun. It's a fun, silly topic, but there is some historical event that happened. Was it a war? Not really. I'm sure you guys will disagree, but there wasn't really like a war. This might come as a shock to you. But yes, yeah, let's get into it. What is the emu war? So if you want to just like skip the rest of the lecture, here is the TLDR. Or TLDW, I guess? TLDL? Didn't listen, didn't watch. Essentially what happened is local farmers from Western Australia requested assistance from the Australian military to help control the emu population in the Campion district. More specifically, the wheatland area of Western Australia, which is where a lot of wheat farming was done and still is done to this day. Because the area is basically just ideal conditions for growing wheat. So it's a very important sort of agricultural region. In fact, the Campion district, this place, is actually abandoned. For some reason, people just decided it wasn't worth trying to grow crops there. And I'm sure you can probably joke, oh, it's because of the emus took over or something like that. Lewis guns were considered heavy artillery. I'll get to that. But yes, because of the involvement of the military, media at the time of 1932, sorry, I should have probably included the year. This is in 1932. The media adopted the name of the Emu War when referring to the culling because, hey, it's a funny joke. It involved 3 personnel from the 7th Heavy Artillery. I think it was also might be properly referred to as the 7th Heavy Battery. I apologize, I may have gotten my military terms mixed up. And essentially it was the equipment that they had were 2 Lewis guns. I'll show an image of the Lewis gun a little bit later, if you don't know what it is, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. All in all, the operation took, I believe, 1 month, 1 week, and 1 day. And approximately 986 emus were confirmed kills, according to the official reports by the commander of the operation, which of course had little to no impact on the population of emus. Now, if I just double check, because I meant to do this before, how many emus are in Australia? How many emus in Australia? There is estimated to be between 625,000 to 725,000 modern wild emus in Australia at the moment. So, killing little over little under 1,000, probably not that many actual birds died in comparison to the actual population, because it turns out emus actually have quite a big habitat range. But yeah, moving on. So, that's the TLDR of what the emu is. So, this is Australia, in case you didn't know what Australia looks like. Congratulations, here's Australia. I think this is from 2006, this map. But we are going to be focusing on, specifically, this region over here. You see it says Western Australia. I should probably have had more of a high contrast cursor. But we'll be looking at basically the southwestern region of Australia, in Western Australia. This sort of region around Perth is where the wheatland is. As seen in Mad Max, yes, sure. But as you can see, Australia, fairly green country, aside from all the desert. But it turns out that the emus are actually able to sustain and live themselves and live in more inland regions. So the true population of the emu might actually be much greater than the number I gave you earlier. Because it's just simply kind of unfeasible to, I guess, estimate or count just how many emus are alive in Australia. So yeah, just in case you don't know what an emu is, they are flightless birds endemic to Australia. Here's a nice image of one. They can reach, so not height, they can reach up to 1.9 meters tall, which is 6'3". That's them fully standing up with like neck elongated. So they are fairly big, fairly big creatures. They can sprint up to 48 kilometers an hour, which is pretty fast. That's 30 miles an hour. What's that in weight? I don't know actually how heavy they are. I probably should have checked that. Let me go check my... How much does an emu weigh? An emu weighs, on average, 37 kilograms for a female and 32 kilograms for a male. So they're pretty big creatures. Fairly sizable creatures, considering it's a bird. They are omnivorous, so they will eat any insects and plants. Specifically important for this lecture, they eat plants. They'll eat anything that they can. They are capable of living without water for weeks, it turns out. Which is probably why they are able to live in more desert, arid regions, inland Australia. Their breeding season is in winter, so just for the people in the Northern Hemisphere, just a heads up. The Southern Hemisphere's seasons are flipped, so winter in Australia is about May to August. Something like that. May to August, or maybe June to August. So that is when winter happens, and then our summer is in like December, January, February. So yeah, it's actually on the coat of arms. The breeding season will be more important later. It's on the coat of arms of Australia. It's one of the 2 national animals that is on the coat of arms of Australia alongside the kangaroo. It's actually considered a pest. Guess what? So is the kangaroo. And you can eat it just as well with the kangaroo. So fun fact about Australia is that we can legally eat the coat of arms. Hello, Director Nemo. Thank you for the raid. Sorry, I have the I have alerts set off. Thank you very much. I'll do the shout outs though. Thank you for the raid. Sorry, I just have it off so it doesn't interrupt. I apologize. Thank you very much for the raid. I hope your stream went well. Thank you very much. I hope the Power Wash Simulator. Oh yeah, you're playing with Vivi. Thank you very much for the raid. I apologize. I'm in lecture mode, so I apologize if I'm in too serious a mode for the lecture. But thank you very much. We're here to learn the truth about the emus. Yes. Well, good time to raid. We're learning about what an emu is. So for the raiders, I'll just repeat it. It's a flightless bird endemic to Australia. Can reach up to 1.9 meters tall when it fully elongates its neck and stands up fully. Can sprint up to 48 kilometers an hour. It's omnivorous. Breeds in the winter. Australian winter being the summertime, because seasons are opposite to the northern hemisphere. And yeah, it's also on our coat of arms. It's a pest, and you can eat it. I've never actually had it. Maybe I should order some after today. But I think you have to go to a specialty butcher to get some emu meat. I tried looking it up, and I don't think Coles and Woolworths stock it, so that's a bit of a shame. But yeah. I should have turned the dropping emotes on. I probably should have done that. I apologize. Okay, moving on. So yes, Australian emus. You might think, oh, how much damage could an emu do? They actually have pretty serious claws. We're not talking in terms of a cassowary. Nowhere near as dangerous as a cassowary. Cassowaries are very, very dangerous. If you ever end up in Australia, do not antagonize a cassowary. They're very scary. They're essentially dinosaurs. Emus are not as hostile. There have been confirmed attacks in Australia. When I was doing research for this topic, because I wanted to check, have emus ever attacked people? There's actually 2 cases that I found when researching the emu war. One was in 1906, in which a woman's hair bun was attacked by an emu, and it apparently ruined her hair, and she fainted in shock at her hair being ruined. And some willing standby sort of witness rushed over and used her parasol to fight back the emu, and then eventually a crowd came and helped. That was one case, and then I think there was another case in which a farmer and his dog were attacked by an emu. But aside from that, I don't think they're particularly known for any sort of violence against humans. What is essentially a dinosaur? Yeah, I mean, a lot of animals in Australia do have more sort of I guess, prehistoric sort of characteristics because of its unique sort of insular evolution, I suppose. I'm talking it out of my butt, I apologize, but I believe because of Australia's isolated nature from the rest of the world is that the evolutionary traits that creatures, animals evolved into are very different. It's why we have marsupials. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's the emu's claws. They do have some serious equipment, but nowhere near as effective as, let's say, a Lewis gun. And so yeah, here's another comparison. So the average height of an emu is about 1.5 meters. So here's the average human. I don't know if this is an average human. It's 1.8 meters tall, but they're fairly tall. And I think this is a different species of emu, or maybe another flightless bird that's also in Australia. I apologize. I'm bigger than the average Vtuber. Yeah, I'm here. I think here. So I'm a little bit taller than an emu. I was about 5'10". Is it? Oh, I guess it is. Oh yeah, because 2 meters is what, 6'6", I think. So 1.8 is somewhere around there, somewhere in 6 foot, right? Could I win in fighting against an emu? No, and we'll get into that. We'll get into that, don't worry. So yes, there's your facts about the emus and Australia. So, here's where I thought, okay, I've got a bit of a gotcha. What is a war? So the definition of what is a war. War is an armed conflict between the armed forces of states. And I thought, oh, I've got a gotcha. For all the people in chat who are like, oh, the emu war. Oh, the emu war is real. Oh, Australia lost the war against the emus. Oh, Australia is such a joke of a country because they lost against emus. So I thought, what is a war? What is the definition of a war? Because I thought that would be funny because we've just gone through. Oh, what is the? Hang on, why is my slides not working? What is the definition of an emu? What is the definition of Australia? What is the definition? What is the emu war? I thought, okay, well, maybe I should throw in what is the definition of war. I thought, well, armed. Emus don't have arms. They're birds. But yes. As it turns out, I'll just go through the full definition just in case. This is by the International Committee of the Red Cross, for what it's worth, or between government forces and armed groups that are organized under a certain command structure and have the capacity to sustain military operations, or between such organized groups. So I thought, well, armed forces. Emus don't have arms. Turns out they do. Turns out emus actually do have little arms. They're just hiding them. So there goes that gotcha. Turns out they have tiny little wings that they keep up in, they're like little T-Rex arms, basically, yeah. So it turns out that if you use the pure definition of its armed forces, technically an emu does have arms, so it is capable of being involved in an armed conflict, I suppose, if you want to use that definition. So yeah, there's an emu. Thank you for the image of an emu with little arms. Concealed carry, yeah, look at those guns. Anyway, what is the emu war, and why does it happen? Why did it happen? So, I guess you're now thinking, well, enough of that, let's get on to the history. Let's get on to the history of the emu war. Psych! Anyone know who this is? Anyone at all? Not Abraham Lincoln, no, it's not Batman either. Alexander, nope. Caesar, nope. Bald man, no. Augustus, nope. Marcus Aurelius, nope. John Emu, nope. Pompey, Crassus, nope. No, it's not Cicero. So maybe you're getting kind of close. This is actually Gaius Marius. Anyone in chat know what the Marian reforms are? Anyone in chat? Any ideas of what the Marian reforms are? Land distribution. Yes, this will be very important for later. So if you don't know who Gaius Marius was, he was alive from approximately 157 BC to 86 BC. He was a Roman general and statesman. He served as consul 7 times. He was a very important person in the late Republican period, or towards the end of the Republican period. And the most important thing that he did for the sake of Rome, or Rome's history, or the biggest impact he had on history, was that he introduced the Marian reforms. So the Marian reforms was essentially a reorganization of the military. Numerous different things that we could go into. I could spend a long time talking about the Marian reforms. But the most important thing that we have to talk about, which is relevant to the topic at hand of the Emu War, is that the Marian reforms introduced land grants for veterans. So, obviously, what happened was that the military essentially were, not exactly the most loyal. And so the Marian reforms were able to help foster loyalty to the commander rather than the state. And so on and so forth, but there was a civil war between Gaius Marius and Sulla. Sulla actually wins, so Gaius Marius does die. during this the Civil War. And so Marius himself didn't actually didn't actually enact many land grants for veterans, but his successors such as Sulla and later rulers such as Caesar and into the Empire period did introduce land distribution for veteran soldiers who had retired from service. So, very important for later, this land grants for veterans. So, now we can go back to Australia versus emus, right? Yeah? Now we can actually learn about what happened in the emu war, right? This is chat? No, this is not chat. This is not you. That's an emu. Psych! Anyone know what this is? King of Australia, no. Start of World War I. Congratulations. Yes, this is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by, I forget his name. Let me go check his name. I should have probably written that down. By a Serbian nationalist. Franz Ferdinand. Blah, blah, blah. Assassin. Let me go get the name. It was Gavrilo Princip, I think is how you say his name. I apologize. I'm not very good at speaking Serbian. But yes. Oh, ads. Okay, pausing for the ads. How are you guys doing? Are you liking the presentation so far? Are you liking the lecture? He was definitely not an anarchist. He was a Balkan nationalist. Yeah, it's a bit of a topic that maybe is a little bit too spicy. Yeah, 90-second ad. This is the best way to disable pre-rolls and automatic roll ads that I have no control over. But yeah. You wish you got here earlier. Welcome. Don't worry, this will be, I guess you may not be subscribed so you can't hear me say this, but there will be, there'll be planned breaks, yeah. There'll be planned breaks. I'll probably be taking a bathroom break during the next one. But yeah, basically it's, like, with me doing the ad breaks, and I should probably repeat this for the people who have, oh, you have Turbo, okay, fair enough. Essentially what happens is that when people join streams, I think they get personalized ads after watching 30 minutes, so I have no control over when those ads play for them. If I do this system, then I control all the ads, there's no pre-rolls, and then I can pause during the breaks. Okay, welcome back people from the ads, I apologize, it's a slight inconvenience, but I hope you can understand that you guys would already get ads playing, you also get pre-rolls. If I have these ads autoplay, like this, I can control when the ad breaks happen, which means you guys won't miss out on anything in the lecture. So hopefully that makes sense. You also won't get pre-rolls, so people coming into the stream won't get ads, and hopefully, you know, people won't miss out on anything. Hopefully. That's the idea. So as I was saying, psych. Guess what? We're gonna talk about World War I. Welcome, Mia. Oh no, your stream crashed. That sucks. Thank you very much for the raid, Mia. Thank you very much. I hope Space Marine went well. The evil game. Is it? I'm guessing you had technical issues. Thank you very much. The Tyranids won. That's a shame. Anyway, welcome guys. I apologize. I won't be able to... It's so laggy. I'm sorry. It's really fun though. Might be playing it after this lecture. But yeah, welcome guys. We're talking about the Emu War. Insects, in that we're actually talking about World War I. So, Franz Ferdinand, Archduke of Austria, is assassinated, and World War I happens. So you probably don't need me to explain everything about World War I, but basically what happens is Australia gets called in. So Australia joins World War I. after Britain declares war on Germany on the 4th of August 1914. 421,809 Australians serve in the war. Over 60,000 are killed, and over 137,000 are wounded, which gives a massive casualty rate of over 65%. It's one of the worst in the war. The financial cost was 188 million, 188,480,000 pounds. Very, very expensive war. Sort of a baptism by fire for Australia. They had served in wars prior, but this was a very much a brutal war for Australians. Unlike other countries, they actually introduced a egalitarian repatriation system, so the longest serving troops returned home first. In other countries, they did it via regiments, which meant sometimes people were assigned to regiments for like a month, and then the war ended, and then they got to go home, right? So with this system, they basically did it via service, so people who had been fighting in the war for the longest got to go home first. It was a massive logistical issue because the Australian troops were stationed all across the various different fronts. So there were some in France, there were some in Britain, there were some in Egypt. Australians were all over the place in World War I. So bringing them back to Australia, bringing them home, was a massive, it was sort of a logistical nightmare, essentially. But they actually managed to get all of the soldiers home by the early 1920s. Australia itself didn't commit to the Russian war, the Russian Civil War that was in, 1919? Although some soldiers did volunteer and join the British Army. I think some naval vessels also served in the Black Sea. But for the most part, the Australian contingent of World War I eventually made it home in 1920. And the Australian Imperial Force, which is the AIF, that was the name of the army at the time, officially disbands on the 1st of April 1921. But yeah, this picture is just from the Australian War Memorial. So yeah, it was actually very impressive that they managed to get most of their troops home in the span of, I think, like 1.5 years. It was very, very impressive. So here's some of the Australian troops actually on their way home. This is them boarding a train, I believe, to go to the docks where they would eventually go back home via boat. World War I was the first time planes were used. I don't know for certain, but that sounds potentially right. I'm not a war historian by any means. It's probably like the first organized conflict. I believe America may have used planes to bomb. I think they used planes to bomb protesting miners. I think. Oh, is the Italy versus Ottomans war? Okay. I mean, yeah, there's sort of like all those conflicts around that sort of time period would have blended together. From 1913 was the first war with planes. Okay, so a year earlier. Yeah, this is the Australians being repatriated. I thought it was an interesting picture. So what does this have to do with the Emu War? So, when Australians were looking to repatriate their soldiers, their veterans from World War I, they needed to give them something to do. So Australian government set up a policy to place the returning soldiers into employment, education, or care if they were too injured, and even provided them with housing through the repatriation department. So including the war pensions that they were owed from the war, it came to £238 million, which is a lot of money, as you can probably tell. It's more money than they actually spent on the war. It was spent on paying the veterans. So a large portion of discharged veterans actually were granted land in farming, in agricultural regions in Western Australia, because the land was seen as suitable for farming. in very basically agricultural marginal areas. So there was no farming actually established. And the government saw this as a good opportunity to establish new farming regions in Western Australia. So this is actually called the Wheat Belt. Sorry, I called it Wheatland earlier in the stream. I actually meant to call it the Wheat Belt. Any questions, by the way? Any questions? If you do have any questions, guys, please use the highlighted message redeem. That will help me if it's like a serious question. They did go by them? Yeah, Australia was pretty good about supporting their veterans when they came back. Does that include Perth? I think Perth by that point it was a fairly major urban settlement, so there were probably people who went to Perth, but I believe a fairly significant portion of the veterans did end up in sort of agriculture. Was Australia able to sustain itself on agriculture during that time? No. So we'll get to that, I think, very, very soon. But there is... We'll talk about the Australian economy in a hot second. So yeah, this is the introduction of the Western Australia Wheat Belt. This is basically just the various different regions in Australia. This is the modern region. In World War I, this was a lot bigger. I believe Campion is, I think, probably like more over like this region, somewhere over here. I don't know if you can see my cursor at the moment. But essentially, the Wheat Belt was a lot bigger, but obviously some places were abandoned. So yeah, moving on. Unfortunately, the Great Depression happens and ruins everything. If you don't know what the Great Depression was, it was the economic downturn in 1929, and went for about 10 years. What essentially happened is the stock markets in Wall Street crashes, and essentially there was a runoff effect with various different policies that the US introduces, which makes it a global catastrophe for the stock markets, and global trade essentially collapses, including the 1930 US Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which imposed massive tariffs on imports in an attempt to, I think, try and promote people to buy local American goods. I believe was the intention, but essentially just destroyed global trade, which essentially ruined the stock market of all other countries' reliance on exports, which disproportionately affected Australia, as Australia's economy was over-reliant on exports in both agriculture and industrial sectors. So the Australian economy completely collapses. There was upwards of 29% unemployment in, I think, 1930. And this, so as you can probably tell, with the collapse of the agricultural exports, the agricultural business industry in Australia just gets absolutely obliterated by this. So the farmers are told, hey, you need to produce wheat. If you produce wheat, we will give you subsidies. That's what the Australian government says they'll do. So all of the farmers go, well, we need to make money somehow. Let's go start growing some wheat. So all of the farmers I really wish my keyboard would work, in the wheat belts are essentially incentivized to start growing wheat. So that's the establishment of the Western Australian Wheat Belt, in which all these farmers they pivot to producing wheat on massive scales. And so yeah, it was so bad that even the farmers were threatening to not even sell their wheat supplies. So very importantly, October 1929. Do you remember what I said about the emus earlier in the lecture, if you were here? Obviously, there's some people from the raid. They actually... No, they do have arms, yes, technically. But you might notice this is the actual population or habitat range of emus in Australia. And you can probably see, suitable and stable, this sort of lighter blue colour, you can kind of see there is a significant overlap between where the wheat belt is and where the emu habitat is suitable and stable. So you have all of these farmers who are growing wheat en masse, combined with it being basically where emus love to eat. On top of that, it is the... One sec, just gonna hydrate. October. The emus have finished their breeding season in winter, and you know what happens to the emus when they finish their breeding season? They return from the inland regions and go towards the coast, because they want to have fresh water sources for summer. So, what does agricultural regions have? They have lots of food in the form of the crops growing, and they have lots of water to help sustain their crops and their livestock. So you have a perfect storm of mass amounts of wheat just growing in fields, not getting picked, and a lot of hungry emus who have just given birth to a new generation of emus, so they're all hungry babies wanting food. So you have the March of the Emus. So this is actually a field that has been completely ruined. This is a fallow field purely through emus. So this was taken, I believe, in October 1929, or maybe in the 1930. It has been completely destroyed by the emus. So yes, during the breeding season, following the breeding season in winter of Australia, so that is, again, if you're not familiar with Australian seasons, that is about June to August, essentially, is our winter. So come October, they're looking for fresh food and water, which means during that period, approximately 20,000 emus migrated into the wheatland, or wheat belt, I should say, region in Western Australia. And they just went to town, because all these farmers who weren't picking their crops had basically just supplied a buffet for these emus. So they just went to town on the various different farmlands, they destroyed all the crops, they ate it all, and they just, more importantly, they actually destroyed fences. So what they had in Australia was called a rabbit-proof fence, which was a very ineffective, as it turns out, fence system that was meant to stop rabbits, which are pests in Australia. They were introduced pests by the first settlers because they wanted to hunt in Australia, and it turns out if you don't kill the rabbits, they just breed like crazy. And so rabbits were a massive pest in Australia, still are. In, I think, Queensland, you're actually not allowed to have rabbits as a pet. They're that much of a pest. But yes, an important thing is that rabbits, like emus, also devastate croplands. Just completely obliterate farmlands and agricultural regions, and it's just a bad time for the industry. So when these fences were destroyed, it allows rabbits into the farmland regions, which made the problem even worse. Basically, this was not an uncommon sight during the 1929 to 1932 region. Time period, I should say. Any questions? Any questions? Hemo-emu. I'll give you guys a second. Let me just check on my ad timer. Ooh, what is this? Sorry. What is not considered a pest in Australia? Quite a few things. Are emus tasty? I don't know, I've never had it. Did they have to grow wheat? So, the reason they grow wheat is because the Australian government promised them subsidies for growing wheat, which never happened. So all these farmers grew massive amounts of wheat in the wheat belt, and then just kind of got tricked, essentially. It's just like the perfect storm of mess up and terrible events happening that resulted in this massive destruction of agricultural regions by the emus. Why are dogs not considered pests? They are. Dingoes are, I think, considered pests. Can people just eat the rabbits? Have you ever tried to hunt a rabbit? Are you aware, like, for every rabbit you hunt, there's probably, like, hundreds, thousands more just breeding away, making more rabbits? It's pretty difficult. What happened to all the unsubsidized wheat during the emu's attack? They ate it. They ate it. So basically, it's just the perfect storm of various different things happening in history that resulted in a lot of food supplies being available for the emus, and them just being able to, well, eat whatever they wanted. So, the farmers strike back. Oh wait, hang on, let me check my time. How long am I doing on time? We've got ads in 9 minutes. Okay. So the veteran farmers, because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these farmers actually served in World War I. They realized they needed some pretty serious firepower to deal with the emus. Very, very serious firepower, because emus aren't small. As we mentioned earlier, sorry, I'm just gonna have to click. As I mentioned earlier, emus, where is it? Pretty big. Very big. You can't just chase them off with, you know, a spade or a shovel or a stick. Like, they're big, and they don't give a crap. So the farmers knew we need some pretty serious firepower to deal with this. And so obviously some of these veterans were aware that machine guns are pretty good at mowing down lots of targets in a very quick succession. Because, as I mentioned, there were approximately 20,000 emus in the region, just obliterating the agriculture. So, a group of farmers go to the government of Australia. They petition to the Minister of Defence, who is Sir George Pearce, which is this chap here. And Sir George Pearce thinks that, actually, this is a pretty good idea. Because there was actually a brewing secession movement in Western Australia at the time, and so he thought that if the Australian government acted in a way that helped the farmers of Western Australia, it might help quell any sort of independence movements. It also, you know, helped give the military some target practice. So he agreed on conditional terms, and then because he wanted to help the Australian government's image in Western Australia, he also hires a camera crew to help film evidence of the events for, you know, propaganda purposes. How close has Western Australia ever gotten to independence? I believe some of the votes have resulted in, like, people putting it to I think it has reached, like, referendum levels, but failed in the referendum, right? I'm not too sure on the specifics, but it's happened a few times. A big thing about Western Australia is that because it's so far away from the rest of the population of Australia, and it also has a lot of money. A lot of our mining industry is in Western Australia, so a lot of the money in Australia was in Western Australia. So sometimes, you know, when you have a region that is so rich with money, so rich with resources, yet feels marginalized in government, you know, it can understand why people might want independence movements. 2/3 of electors voted in favour of secession, but efforts to implement the result proved unsuccessful. Well, there you go. There you go. Is it true that every Australian streamer is required to give a presentation on the Emu War? I don't know if anyone else has done this. It probably has. But this is my sort of shtick. Anyway, questions? Any questions about anything on this slide? Otherwise, I will continue to hydrate. West Australia is Texas. Can we see videos? There will be a video later. Should do a bit on the rum rebellions. Maybe. I'll be taking suggestions after today's topic. What kind of guns did the emus bring to the war? None. Who would win, wild hogs or emus? Probably wild hogs. Having seen videos of hogs, they're pretty scary. Emus would just run away. Okay. Well, moving on. So, preparations begin. So these are the terms that Sir George Pearce, the Minister of Defence, agreed to. So the guns had to be operated by military personnel. The transport of the troops had to be handled by the Western Australian government. So the troops were actually based in, I believe, New South Wales. So these soldiers flew or somehow got from one side of Australia to the other. The farmers had to provide them with both food and accommodation. And, most importantly, the farmers actually had to pay for the ammunition. So these farmers who were already in financial strife from the Great Depression and having wheat that no one would buy or would only buy for very low prices, then had to pay for the ammunition on top of that. And there's also supposedly that any wrongdoing had to be the fault of the farmers, not the actual military themselves. So, yeah, the military operations were due to begin in October 1932. So, basically around the time in which the emus would be emigrating into the Wheatbelt region because they were looking for more sources for food. So 3 soldiers from the 7th Heavy Artillery, I think this is maybe meant to be the 7th Heavy Battery, were involved. So you had, I apologise for the name pronunciations, Major Gwynedd Purves Wyn Aubrey Meredith. You had Sergeant S. McMurray, and you also had Gunner J. O'Halloran. So these were the 3 troops that were involved. They were equipped with 2 Lewis guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Unfortunately, rainfall delayed the operation by the month because the rain forced the emus to actually scatter for some reason. So this is actually Major Meredith. I'm just going to refer to him as Meredith because he's got quite the name. But this is actually Major Meredith. I believe this is taken well after his involvement in the Emu War. Do emus travel in flocks? Yes. I think the hang on, I'll look up what the collective of an emu is called, but what is the collective noun of emu? A mob. A mob of emus. There you go. An omelette. No, not quite. So we have the onset of military intervention into controlling the population of the emus in Western Australia. So the opening conflict, and I've phrased it like this because I figured you guys would probably want me to phrase it in a way that makes it sound like an actual war. So the first day of the military operation to help control numbers of emus, 50 emus were sighted near Campion, which is in the Wheatbelt region, or it's a former area of the Wheatbelt. It's been abandoned. So on the first day of operations, not very successful. Not very successful at all. Turns out, when you try and sneak up on emus with guns, and then you shoot at them, they don't like that. They run away. Rip those men's eardrums. Yeah, I don't think this is a particularly safe way of firing a gun. So they also attempted to herd the birds into an ambush. So yeah, that didn't help either. The first attempt fails due to range, and the second round was able to kill a number of birds. And basically a bit later in the day, they had a little bit more success because they encountered another small flock or mob of emus, and perhaps a dozen is reported killed by Commander Meredith or Major Meredith. So here's some of our primary sources for the events. We actually have newspaper reports. So all of these newspaper reports, I've tried to include as many as possible, are from the archive in the Trove Library. If you want to look these up, you can. It's free to do so. But yeah, So the first one we have is from the Canberra Times on the 3rd of November 1932. So this is the day after the first operation. It says, a party of Lewis gunners have again been sent to the Campion district to exterminate emus, which have caused serious damage to crops. The officer in charge of the party received orders from military headquarters in Sydney for 100 emu skins, the feathers of which will be used for the hats worn by light horsemen. Now, this specific quote about where this order comes from, I could not find any other source for this information. And herein lies the problem about reporting about the Emu War, is that because it's such a comical event, it's impossible to figure out what is fact and what is fiction, because the journalists love to take the piss of this. Okay, we have ads starting soon, so I'll pause it here. Ads should be starting any second now. I don't know when it's going to happen, so I'll just take a break here. It says ads starting soon, so it should be any second now. Thank you for the follows, by the way. Welcome, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the presentation. How are you guys finding it? It should be happening. I just don't want to get into the next slide. If you have any questions, let me know about this slide. Yeah, I don't want to get too much into the point, because it's... There we go. Okay. There's the ads. There's the ads. So I might just very quickly, guys, I'm just going to go BRB to the bathroom. So one sec. Stay. No, stay. Lottie, stay. There we go. Google says emus mate in winter and they migrate after the breeding season. Yes, McPawned. Yep. That's what we're talking about. I don't know if you can see this or hear this at the moment. I don't know if you have Turbo, if you're subscribed at the moment. Welcome back. I was just saying that, yeah, that is true. We did talk about that, McPawned. Don't worry. So this is the reason this is happening is because of that emu emigration, or migration, I should say, not emigration. Migration patterns. Welcome back from the ads. Are the emu war sources on par with medieval sources, as in them being untruthful? That's the problem. So as I was mentioned, this emigration, that's pretty good. This claim, oh sorry, there's a Lewis gun. This claim about them using the feathers for the hats of light horsemen, or the claims that they wanted 100 emu skins, I couldn't find any sources that back this up. And essentially that is a common occurrence with the reporting on the emu war, is that there are a lot of statements about various different things, including specifically the numbers of emus killed. And because it's such a stupid event in history and such a silly sort of event, the media just took the piss, essentially. They just made fun of the whole ordeal. And it makes trying to decide what is fact and fiction quite difficult. Because apparently the military is ordering them to collect the bodies of the emus for uniforms, essentially. But again, I was struggling to find any other source that corroborates this information. So this is from the Canberra Times, reported a day after the first actions. So, the second attempt, the ambush at the dam, on the 4th of November. So Major Meredith realizes that, well, sneaking up on the emus in an open field wasn't exactly the most successful. How about we set up an ambush at a water source? So at a local dam, they set up an ambush, of which apparently over 1,000 emus were spotted heading towards their position. And so, using classic ambush strategies, they waited until the emus got very, 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 very close before engaging with the targets, or the enemy, if you want to call them that, the enemy combatants. Unfortunately, for both of the gunners, both guns jam after killing 12 birds, and the remainder just run away. What a surprise that the very loud sounding gun that is killing their friends is making the emus sprint away. And so the ambush is a complete failure, and no more birds are sighted for the rest of the day. The Lewis gun, very, very interesting gun. I think it's a very cool looking gun. If you're not aware, it was used in World War I pretty extensively by the British and the various different colonies or colonial nations. Used it in Call of Duty World at War. Yeah, I think it's in quite a few games. Air cooling go brr. They should have double checked. Well, you know, things happen on the battlefield of war, of the Emu War. So yes, the second attempt is just a complete failure. They only managed to kill 12. The rest just run away. So limited success continues, unfortunately, for the Meredith and his two brave soldiers. So he moves further south to an area in which the emus are reported to be more tame, with the hope that when they shoot at them, they don't run away, which is not exactly what's going to happen. Because when loud noise happens, birds run away. And then, again, this claim is from 1952. This is from a newspaper. I think I have it featured later in the lecture. But there's a 1952 claim that each pack of emus seems to have its own leader now. A big black-plumed bird which stands fully 6 feet high and keeps watch whilst his mates carry on their work of destruction, and warns them of our approach. So as you can tell, some of the reporting about the emu's behavior in the Emu War is just completely ridiculous and very hard to discern whether it actually happened. And bearing in mind, this is reported, I think, 29 years later? 19 years later? Sorry, I'm not very good at maths. After that, they have another attempt at trying to outmaneuver the birds. So Major Meredith has another idea. They mount one of the machine guns on a truck. Except the truck was slower than the emus, and the terrain was too rough for the truck to ride through in a suitable manner for the gunner to actually fire any shots from the back. So unfortunately, they the early attempts at using the Warthog from Halo did not end in any sort of actual legitimate attempts at shooting the enemies. Oh, sorry if we're not calling it a puma. May as well call it an emu. So by the 8th of November, that is 5 days into the operation, over a quarter of the ammunition have already been fired. So 2,500 rounds of ammunition have already been fired, killing, and this is one of the problems we're reporting about the Emu War. It's believed to have killed as little as 50 to, actually, hang on, I need to edit this, one sec. I have to actually edit this. It's not 5,000, it's 500. So various different news reportings reported between 50 to 500 emus being killed with 2,500 bullets fired. So, you know, the potential, like, because it was such a farce, the media just went to town on it and said, yeah, they fired like 2,500 rounds and killed 50. So, you know, it's kind of, it's just a complete mess. They can't, like, also bearing in mind, they hired a camera crew to film this. So there's a camera crew recording them the entire time. Because they thought it would make them look good. Which I think is the next slide. Why is it empty? Hang on. Why is it empty? Ah, there we go. Okay, I guess we have to watch it in this view. Apologies. There we go. Will this... Maybe it will load if I go into full screen format. View. Slideshow. Please load. There we go. Okay, so here is the actual footage. I won't talk over it, but this is the footage from... I'll just put my earbuds in so I can hear it. This is actually the footage that was taken from the Emu War.
If we want one of your cars, we'll certainly let you know.
This is an advert. Don't worry, this is just an advert. But here we go. So Western Australia makes war on emus. Army machine guns are called in to help farmers of Campion repel mobs of marauding birds. From the British Movie Tone. That's the company that was hired.
These are some of the unfortunate farmers whose wheat crops have been trampled down by hordes of emus, but they're hopeful of getting rid of the pest at last. They've never used this sort of scarifier before, but things are desperate, and it's war to a finish this time. The scouts of the advancing army have keen eyesight, and in order to get close to the main body, our lads have to do some real stalking, with the enemy watching events through their periscopes, raised up over the heads of corn. Now they're retiring, off at 40 miles an hour.
So just a word of warning for anyone who finds the images of dead animals squeamish, just in a second there will be... It's very funny that, like, you can see the media is just taking the piss. Thank you for the raid, Squishy Wishy Boo. Thank you very much. I'll do the shoutouts just in a sec. But you can see that the media is just taking the piss, right? They're just making fun of the fact, oh, the enemy with their periscopes, with just emus in a field. But yeah.
Well, instead of the birds ruining the farmers, it seems the tables are turned, and there'll be no more damage done here for many a day to come.
There you go. Thank you very much for the raid. I hope your stream went well. Let me just do the shoutouts very quickly. But as you can see, they're just utterly just making fun of the army, because it's just a completely ridiculous event. And so the attempt to try and create propaganda to help stop Western Australia from seceding isn't exactly going to plan for poor Pierce. Thank you very much for the raid. I apologize. I'm in teaching mode, so I apologize for not doing the shoutouts. But I hope your stream went well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. Moving on. Do you guys want to watch that again? And I guess for anyone who just arrived, would you like to see it again? One more time? It's only a minute. Why not? Okay. Here we go.
If we want one of your cars, we'll certainly let you know.
Let's skip that.
These are some of the unfortunate farmers whose wheat crops have been trampled down by hordes of emus, but they're hopeful of getting rid of the pest at last. They've never used this sort of scarifier before, but things are desperate, And it's war to a finish this time.
War to a finish.
The scouts of the advancing army
Scouts of the advancing army.
And in order to get close to the main body, our lads have to do some real stalking, with the enemy watching events through the periscopes, raised up over the heads of corn. Now they're retiring, off at 40 miles an hour.
It's a road-running cartoon?
Well, instead of the birds ruining the farmers, it seems the tables are turned, and there'll be no more damage done here for many a day to come.
Yeah. It's just so stupid. It's just so stupid. They're just making fun of the military and the whole ordeal because it's just a complete joke. So, moving on. So this is actually a report on the 8th of November, 1932, in the Sydney Morning Herald. So I'll read it out for you guys. Lewis gunners killed 200. A boundary rider on the rabbit-proof fence, apologies for my speech impediment, reports that 3 large mobs of emus are heading for the Campion district from the dry northern areas in search of feed and water. Major Meredith stated that it is possible that the gun crews and the guns would leave by motor truck to meet the invaders before they scatter over the feeding grounds. More than a quarter of the 10,000 rounds have been used. Settlers in the Walgulan district, who are also suffering from the emu's depredations, have made preparations for a drive to assist the gunners. An inspector for the Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, who arrived at Campion today, said that the society wished the killing to be as humane as possible, and that he would attend to any wounded birds and kill them where possible. Before proceeding to the successful ambush at the dam, again, more evidence of propaganda may be used, the ambush in which it killed 12 emus out of a possible 1,000 plus. Gunners mounted a gun on a motor truck and pursued about a dozen birds across a rough paddock at 35 miles an hour. The emus maintained their lead of about 60 yards till they entered some timber, the gunners finding it impossible to shoot from the bumping vehicle. During the weekend, 200 emus were killed and many were wounded. So this is the sort of reporting that is happening around the emu war. Which is just... You can see the sort of tone in which the journalists are writing about the events and just how silly it is. Because it's just utterly embarrassing that, and then you also have conflicting information about how many emus have been killed. For example, there's claims that 200 have been killed in this report across 5 days. There's also claims only 50 have been killed. Some claimed that there were 500. So this was in the Sydney Morning Herald. And so this all ties into what I mentioned earlier, the idea of the Australian larrikin. Anyone know what the larrikin is? Aside from if you don't want to read this. Anyone heard of the term of the larrikin spirit of Australia? Once again, the media doesn't support our brave troops fighting in the fields. No. Why is his thumb so long? I don't know. I think that's Crocodile Dundee, the actor who played Crocodile Dundee. So essentially, our Australian larrikinism is a central tenet of Australian culture, in that it's basically everything can be joked about. Everything can be silly, complete disregard for social or political conventions. You're allowed to make fun of anything, and, there's various other definitions. There's a mischievous young person, an uncultivated, rowdy, but good-hearted person. Sorry, I gotta edit this real quick. I'm gonna put a quotation right there. That's bothering me. I apologize. A person who acts with apparent disregard for social or political conventions. Central aspect of Australian culture, a bloke who refuses to stand on ceremony and is a bit of a scallywag. Essentially, what you guys may know as, on the internet, Australian shitposters. Anything can be a joke, and it's always fun to make fun of things, and nothing is serious, and, nothing's off limits. And so that's essentially what's happening, is that the media is invoking Australian larrikinism and just taking the piss of the government and the military. Because it is just a stupid event that's happening before our eyes. Well, before some people's eyes. And then there's embellishments of reports, because part of larrikinism is spinning a yarn, which is an Australian saying to essentially fabricate a story for the sake of entertainment, or to make it, more fanciful or embellished. And so, that larrikinism, also reported by ornithologists, basically bird experts in Australia, using that larrikin spirit to actually report about the event itself. So here's a quote from Dominic 70, who I believe was the head of the Australian Ornithological Society in Australia at the time. So he reported, the machine gunner's dreams of point-blank fire into series of masses of emus were soon dissipated. The emu's command had evidently ordered guerrilla tactics, and its unwieldy army soon split up into innumerable small units that made use of the military equipment uneconomic. A crestfallen field force therefore withdrew from the combat area after about a month. So this is him reporting on the events of the Emu War. It's just everyone's just taking the piss. Because guess what happens when you fire a loud gun at a bird? It runs away. So, the government reacts. Because obviously, the media has been taking the piss, everyone's taking the piss, and the politicians in the opposition are also taking the piss. So the House of Representatives discussed the operation. The negative coverage of the events by the local media, exacerbated by the claims that only a handful of emus had been killed across, I think, over 2,500 rounds fired and only 50 killed. You can imagine that doesn't make the military look any good, or makes it look rather ineffective. So the Prime Minister, Joseph Lyons, is asked by opposition MP Rowley James whether a medal would be struck for the soldiers during their brave conduct during the operation. And so, due to the ridicule from the public and the media, Pearce orders the withdrawal of military personnel. And Major Meredith is quoted after this withdrawal having said, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity, aka the ability to take hits, of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. They are like Zulus, who even dum-dum bullets could not stop." So dum-dum bullets, I believe, are expanding rounds. And essentially he's just praising the ability for an emu to take a shot and keep going. Hollow point rounds. Okay, thank you. So essentially what was happening, they were landing hits on the emus, but they were taking those hits and still running 40 plus miles an hour, or kilometers an hour. Which is insane, right? It turns out emus a lot harder to shoot. So like the farmers, when they initially called in the military saying, hey, we need serious firepower to deal with these emus, turns out they weren't lying. So here it is. This is reporting about the Emu War defended in the Argus, which is 19th of November, 1932. So here's the original report. I'll read it out for you. Sorry, I'm just going to clear my throat, and I'll just take a quick peek at how we're doing on time for the ads. 7 minutes, okay. Canberra, Friday. The Minister for Defence, Sir George Pearce, in the Senate today warmly defended the employment of military forces and the use of machine guns in the Emu War in Western Australia. Senator Guthrie, of the United Australia Party of Victoria, asked whether it was possible to kill the emus by more humane, if less spectacular, methods. So George Pearce replied that those who are not familiar with the country, country Australia, in which the emus were numerous, could not realise the damage that the birds could do. Because of the drought in inland areas, the birds had come in thousands to the settled areas. Through the gaps they made in the fences, rabbits also followed. Reports had made it appear that only a few birds had been killed by the machine guns, and he had given instructions that the operation should cease, but he had learned later that the birds had been killed in the hundreds, and, as a result of the renewed representations by the farmers, the military party had returned. It was no more cruel to kill the birds with machine guns than with rifles, and the wounded birds were dispatched immediately. The firing ceased. So what they're saying is, what essentially happens is, the birds were still a problem. So the farmers pleaded to the government again, saying, hey, we need help. So what happens is that Sir George Pierce reinstates the military presence, and the Emu War will continue. After learning that I think the military reporting said that by this point 500 had been killed. So Sir George Pierce hears this number, and hears the pleas of the farmers, and is like, right, it was actually successful all along, let's go back and kill some more birds. And so yeah, this is the claim that even though they are getting gunned down with machine guns, obviously some wounded birds still survive, and that they are being as humane as possible in killing the animals before they die. Now, just a heads up, there may be, I think next slide, there may be some squeamish imagery. Oh no, okay. I think it's a bit later. So yeah, the second military operation begins, and the emus, again, still destroying the crops, which is exasperated by hot weather and droughts, because this is now firmly going into summer in Australia in November. The Premier of Western Australia, who's James Mitchell, is also pleading for support alongside the farmers. So the military returns on the 12th, so that's 4 days after the military operation originally ends. And so yeah, Pierce defends the decision, saying the machine guns were necessary because nothing else could stop them, essentially. And Major Meredith returns to Western Australia due to an apparent lack of experienced machine gunners in the state. So Major Meredith is back on the scene, hopefully more successful than last time. Maybe not. But this is a report from the Emu War again, so on the 12th, same day as first. So the 300 killed in first duel. Machine guns reissued. The Minister for Defence, Sir George Pierce, said today that acting on the information which appeared in the Eastern press in regard to the use of personnel of the military forces with machine guns, which had been provided at the request of the state government of Western Australia, and farmers whose crops were being spoilt by the incursion of large numbers of emus into the outer fringe of the wheat belt of that state, he had withdrawn the personnel with the guns. That's one sentence. It's awful. Sorry, just don't have run-on statements like that. He had since received a report from the base commandment in Perth, which indicated that upwards of 300 emus had been disposed of, and strong representations had been made by the Premier of Western Australia and also by the farmers that owing to the hot weather and the absence of water in the interior, the emus were appearing in the thousands, and pressing for a return for the military party. Knowing as he did the tremendous damage that the birds could cause in the standing crop, and with a desire to save the loss to the farmers, the minister had approved of the party returning to the wheat belt. Yes, so essentially, with the information that 300 emus had been killed, the military was once again sent back in because apparently 300 was satisfying. 300 emus killed with 2,500 rounds. Bear in mind. Which I'm not good at maths, but I think that is what. That's like one emu dying per what? What is that? 500 bullets? No. 80 rounds per emu. It's pretty bad. Pretty bad rate of conversion. So we have the second round, and very quickly they find success. Relative success. 40 emus are killed over the first 2 days of the operation on the 13th and 14th of November. However, that success does not last. Sorry, let me just edit this. I have put that as the 5th. It's meant to be the 15th. Apparently, though, various different reports were killing approximately 100 emus a week by the 2nd of December. So they had actually managed to find their rhythm, so to speak, and they were actually starting to rack up a solid amount of kills. During World War II, it was estimated that 45,000 rounds of small arms ammunition was fired to kill one enemy soldier. Wow. In Vietnam, it was 50,000. I mean, yeah, I suppose that's not the worst conversion rate. Then, for the emus. So, by the 2nd of December, they're actually starting to rack up a decent amount of kills with 100 per week. But unfortunately, that was not enough, and Major Meredith is again recalled from the field on the 10th of December, and the actions of the Emu War cease. And so, in his final reports, Major Meredith confirmed 986 kills, of which 9,860 rounds were fired. So, essentially a kill rate of 1 emu per 100 rounds, I believe. Or 10 rounds, I should say. I'm not very good at maths, am I? But he also claimed that a further 2,500 wounded birds died from their injuries, leading to an estimated 3,500 emus being killed of an approximate 20,000 emus, insurgents, if you want to call them that. So, they did, at least according to this official number, they actually managed to kill a fair amount of emus over the span of, I believe, 1 month, 1 week, and 1 day, which is approximately, 38-ish days? Something like that. But yes, these numbers, probably not very trustworthy, as we've found out with all of the numbers that we've come across with the reporting of the Emu War. So, here is the image that was in the newspaper. So this is the Land newspaper, which I believe is in Adelaide. It says, a casualty in the Emu War. One of the birds shot by the machine gun party sent to rid Campion wheat growers of droves of emus that were damaging crops. Ads are starting soon. Any questions? Any questions before ads start? Hello, welcome. Oh, there's the ads. Any questions, guys? Please let me know. Oh, that's the neighbor's dog. Did the emus get any reparations? No, because they're birds. Did they periodically still thin out the emu herds? Yeah, we'll get to that as well. It was illegal to go out without your hat. In Australia, that is actually a thing. I don't know if any Australians are aware. There's no hat, no play in chats. There are no ads. Oh, there's no ads playing? Okay, well that's fine. Any Australians will know of the saying, no hat, no play. In which basically, if you are at school, you have to legally wear a hat. You legally have to wear a hat. Oh, they're mid-rows. Okay, cool. Because Australia is such a hot and sunny country, you have to wear a hat on the playground to get to play, or even attend school, I guess. Because skin cancer, yes, skin cancer is a massive issue in Australia. So this happened on Thanksgiving, I guess, but we don't have Thanksgiving. Won't the hat retain heat? It's just meant to protect you from the weather conditions in Australia. It's better than cancer, yeah. You just can't go into the sun, out into the sun at lunch, yeah. So you can't play at school if you don't have a hat. That's why Australians all wear hats. I think this is called a trilby? Or maybe it's not a trilby. I don't know which. There's some specific Australian hats that they have. Speaking of, no hat for me. There we go. But yeah. So, more reporting about the Emu War across Australia. Basically, kind of not necessarily the most serious of reporting. Like an Akubra. Yes, like an Akubra. Thank you. Mid-roll's done. Okay, cool. Then moving on. Okay, never mind. Take my coats as well. So, we have the fallout of the Emu War. And this is essentially what happens. So the Emu War is seen as a massive failure. Massive, massive failure. 10,000 rounds and only 900 and something kills. So it's a bit of a laughingstock for the government. And the farmers still had problems with emus. It didn't fix the problem because they barely killed any of the emus. The attempt at culling the population of emus was a complete failure. They had a very, very minor impact on the population. And so yes, again, farmers in 1934, 1943, and even 1948 requested to the government, hey, we need help, there's lots of emus, we need to stop them. And in 1943, they even requested the Australian Air Force to bomb the emus. Because, turns out guns didn't work, so maybe dropping a bomb on them would. Instead, what happened was that a bounty system that had previously been used for controlling emu populations was reintroduced. It was first used in 1923, and that was much more successful. So in 6 months, they killed, there was 57,034 bounties claimed across a 6-month period in 1934. And then by that point, following the emu war in quotations happening, it became an international news story, so it reached the UK in December of 1932, of which conservationists protested the extermination of the rare emu. Bearing in mind, they killed less than 1,000, supposedly less than 1,000 out of an estimated 20,000 mob of emus. Like, it didn't make barely a dent in the population. And so, yes, there were more decries of an attempt at the mass destruction of birds. It's kind of, more people taking the piss about the events. So what did happen is there was an exclusion barrier fencing, which already existed, so there was the rabbit-proof fence. So they introduced more fencing to help keep emus out of agricultural areas, and those tended to be a bit more successful. So if you remember seeing these pictures here, you can see this fence. This is exactly what we're talking about. So these fences were set up all over Western Australia to try and stop emus from accessing the agricultural regions. And then finally, in 1950, Hugh Leslie, who's a politician, requested the release of ammunition for farmers in Western Australia, again, still dealing with the issues of emus, of which the government approved the release of 500,000 rounds to be given to the various different farmers across Western Australia, which is, yeah, that's a lot of rounds, considering they only had 20,000 for the actual emu war. And so, yeah, you have more reports. Australia lost the birds. Well, that's what we're talking about today. So this is a report from the Coolgardie Miner, which is in 1935. As a result of light rains and subsequently scarcity of feed in the Murchison district this winter, emus are migrating southwards in large numbers east of the rabbit-proof fence, says the Ngungarian Standard. They threaten to do as much damage in the East Yanning country as they did 3 years ago, so talking about the emu war. They are coming down in continuous waves until they reach the farming districts. There they remain, living on crops. Oh, that's supposed to be a full stop. Living on crops, since the farmers' fences are useless against the persistent attacks. Farmers in the district are of the opinion that another emu war should be commenced. Although on the last occasion their destruction by soldiers with machine guns was criticised in many quarters, the method proved effective and saved what remained of the wheat. So this is 3 years after the emu war happened. So you can still see that people were still wanting more mass killing events or mass population control involving military personnel. Unfortunately, for the farmers, it didn't happen. And here's the report from 1943. In the Mail, which I think is a Melbourne-based newspaper, request to use bombs to kill emus. Wheat growers in the Walgoolan and Burracoppin districts are concerned over the presence of thousands of emus, which, they say, are menacing their crops. They are roaming the wheatlands in mobs of up to 300, and some farmers want them exterminated by using light bombs dropped from low-flying planes, and by machine guns, in the same way they were destroyed in 1932, where thousands were destroyed to safeguard crops. Again, the reporting of the emu war's success is very, very, it's just completely inaccurate. So they're claiming thousands were killed. Bearing in mind this is, 11 years later? But of course, they're probably exaggerating the numbers in which were killed because they were like, oh, the last time it was so successful, they killed thousands, let's do it again. Herodotus tiers of reporting, exactly, because it's trying to make the event look good so that, they can get support again. But the chief game inspector, Mr. A. Arnold, says the agitation is unfounded. He said today that the situation did not warrant mass extermination of the birds, as his agents and inspectors had reported no undue massing of emus in the wheat or pastoral areas. Mr. Arnold said that with a good season in the north, it was improbable that birds in any numbers would come south this year. I apologise for all the formatting errors, by the way. He attributed the reporting presence of increased numbers in the Walgulan district to the fact that all game is on the move at this time of year, the breeding season. He added that the very fact the emus were reported south of Burakoppen indicated that they were southern emus moving north. Pastoral officials questioned today agree that the war on emus is unnecessary. So there you go. You have conflicting reports about whether the emu war was even successful, because people want to have more military actions happen, because there's more emus still. And so, here we are, on the lasting legacy of the emu war. So, the reason the emu war, which is admittedly a tiny blip on Australian history, has become such an event, such a reported and over-reported event in history and also on the internet, is simply because of, originally, the larrikin mentality of the Australian, of Australia. Because the governments, the opposition in politics, as well as the media, just took the piss of the government and the military, just made them look like utter fools. So Meredith was given the nickname Commander of the Great Emu War, and Pearce, the Minister of Defence, was also given the Minister of Emu War title in Parliament. So ultimately, what is something that is pretty much the small footnote in Australian history has just been exaggerated into this great ordeal in which Australia went to war with the emus and lost. Which of course is revitalised by the internet and Australians themselves loving to spin a good yarn, which is to tell a story that isn't true or over-exaggerated. Oh my god, I missed the brackets, I apologise. So of course the internet is often trying to make fun of everything and anything, as we are all wanting to do on the internet. But it's important to note that Australia was making fun of itself first. And so there's feature films being made. Obviously there was the one I showed earlier in the stream involving small Australian actors and comedians, but there's actually a new one coming out, apparently, in production, involving Monty Python star John Cleese. So, with all that said, guys, I have a question for you guys. Do you still think it was a war, or was the Emu War a failed attempt at population control? And the emus won. Yes. And the emus won, yes. Yes, it was, and you lost. Hey, I'm not from here. I'm from Ireland. Definitely a war. We lost many good men that day. Are you on the side of the emus? Clearly a war. Both, yes. Most definitely a war. War, emus won. The war to end all wars. I figured you guys would all say that. Don't rob the emus of their glorious victory. War crimes committed. Emu should never be forgotten. Ich bin ein Emu. It's the best war. Would the Four Pest campaign also count as a war? Well, no, because that was also a population control effort that failed, right? Are we going to call the Australian killing of cats a war as well? Exactly. So Australia, as I mentioned with the rabbits earlier in the presentation, they are pests. They get population calls all the time. We also have feral pigs. We have feral cats. We have lots of population calls all the time about various different animals that are feral. Even feral camels. Yep, cane toads. All of these happen. Do you think a population cull or an attempt at a population cull should be considered a war? Or is it just because the Emu War is such a funny story that you can take the piss and keep calling it a war? Yeah, we have wild camels in Australia. Similar to the war on drugs? I guess. They didn't kill those wars, so they're not wars. The Emu War is a war because it was called a war by the media. It's not a real war, but it's a war nonetheless. When you call in the military to do it, there's grounds for calling it a war. That's fair. Farmers should have allied with koalas. Koalas don't really do anything. I don't know if you've ever seen footage of a koala in like a habitat or like a animal sanctuary or a zoo. They kind of just don't move. Just sit in the trees, doing nothing. The US had a war on drugs that it lost, and drugs aren't even alive. I suppose. Did the Australians have a casus belli? Yeah, they were raiding crops. There was a justification for the conflict. But yeah. I really don't have anything to end this presentation on, but that's it. That's it. We're done. That's the lecture on the Emu War. That's everything, because there's really nothing. Unfortunately, there's just nothing about the Emu War. It's a very small blip in Australian history, and so there's very little to actually talk about. But yeah, thank you. I hope you enjoyed. Round 2 soon. Well, they tried. They tried to bomb the emus. They tried to shoot them as well in 1935. They tried to bomb them in 1943. And I think in 1948 they tried it again. But the government said no. So yeah. That's it. When's the test? Unfortunately, I forgot to set up a Kahoot. And honestly, I don't think I could even come up with 5 questions for a Kahoot. But yeah, thank you for coming, guys. Go back to the start. That's the Emu War, in which we talked about Romans and World War One. Did the USA intervene in this war? It's partly America's fault that it happened. It's partly America's fault because of the Great Depression. Will this be uploaded on YouTube? Yes. Yes, it will. So, any questions before we end the history lecture here? Any questions at all? No Venice tangent, failed presentation. Sure. Sure. Any questions? Any at all? Was it worth it? You guys wanted this to happen, so here you go. Here's your presentation on the Emu War. I did manage to make it last more than an hour, which is honestly impressive. Where did I gather the information? So most of the information was from the, let me find the source. It is, it's called Feathered Foes, Soldiers, Settlers, and Western Australia's Emu War of 1932. That is a journal article by Murray Johnson that is 10 pages long. It's from 2009? Or is it 2006? I think it might be 2006. This is the primary source that pretty much everyone used. Like, if you're seeing, like, if you read the Wikipedia article, this is, like, the only source that we have. There's the link for it. If it works, hopefully it works. Unfortunately, it just, there's very little actual scholarship, unsurprisingly, on the Emu War, and all we have to go off it are basically just news reportings and the footage from the events, and word of mouth from like the people who were attending, and then some discussion in Parliament, essentially. It is a very small, insignificant event in Australian history. It only lasted for just over a month, and so as a result, there's really not much you can really rely on for historical sources. So it makes the presentation fairly weak, which is why I tried to add some extra things to make it a bit more interesting, such as Gaius Marius and the friggin' World War One, and I mean those are all related, but yes. Is the government paying me? I wish. But yeah, thank you for coming, guys. I totally understand if that's it for you guys, if that's all you're interested in. For the Emu War, I'm just gonna have a normal stream now. I'm just gonna have a regular stream because I haven't streamed in 2 days because I was making this. So yeah, thank you for coming. If you need to head off, thank you for stopping by. Thank you to all the raiders. I'll turn on alerts now, and yeah, we'll just have a regular stream. So there's the alert boxes. Thank you very much for the follows. And let me move everything out of the way. Thanks for the great presentation. Thank you. Oh, right. Before we go, actually, do you guys have any suggestions? What should we have next? What should be our topics for future lectures? Do you have any suggestions? Maybe something a bit more serious, because this one was very slapsticky. Very, very silly.
Zero Giovanni Gorgio Zero just resubscribed for 3 months.
Thank you, Giovanni. Maradona's Hand of God, The Plagues, Northern Crusade, Ireland and the Crusades, Fourth Crusade. I've already done a presentation on the Fourth Crusade. It's on YouTube if you want to watch it. Irish Rebellions, kind of covered that a little bit. War of the Roses, Japanese incursion into Manchuria, Punic Wars, interventions of the Russian Civil War. Yeah, I did very briefly mention that. Revolutions of Europe, William Wallace. What's Australia's main source of income? Exports, I believe. Exports involving industrial, so mining, those sorts of things. Second Boer War, Revolution of 1848. I've already done the Fourth Crusade, yes. Lead up to the Roman Empire? So what, the end of the Republic, start of the Roman Empire? Peasants' Crusade. Peasants' Crusade is very difficult to write about because there's very little resources. Kind of like this. Evolution of Australia. Colony to country. The Cod Wars. History of Venice. I could do that, I suppose. I've kind of touched on that in the Fourth Crusade one, though, I think. History of the Cathars. Asbestos. Mongol invasions, final Persian Empire, Ice Age, Gallipoli, Harold Holt. I mean, there's lots of very strange events in Australian history. Cane Toads, Renaissance, Fall of the Byzantines, Norman invasion of England. Why Caligula fought a whale? Because he was insane. History of the AFL. Okay. I mean, there's some good suggestions in between some of these shitposty suggestions, but yeah, I'll try and think of some stuff, and I'll have, like, if you want to make suggestions, I have a Discord, discord.gg/clear, if you would like to join. If you would like to suggest anything, there's definitely I think there's a suggestions channel if you want to make some posts there. Because, yeah, I don't have any plans for future lectures. This was the last of the ones that had been planned for, like, the last year or so. So, yeah, if you have any suggestions, please let me know. Babylonians, babies or adults. You're serious on NRL history? I don't know anything about the sports in Australia, to be honest. Captured the Dutch fleet? Oh, you mean when cavalry captured a boat, a navy? Yeah, that's kind of too narrow an event, I think. If it's stuff like this, like the Emu War, where it's just one blip in a bigger, larger conquest, it's kind of difficult. I faced the same issues with the War of the League of Cambrai presentation that I did, which is also on YouTube if you want to check that out. It's a very difficult to write or present or find even information about topics if it's too narrow a focus. If it's a broader topic, then it's a lot easier. Nika riots? So yeah, if I did the Nika riots, I would do that in the broader scope of, is it Justinian's reign? I think? It would have to be something in, in something a bit broader than that. The Opium Wars. Yeah, I mean, that could be interesting. Like the fall of the Chinese, what is it, Qing Empire? Collapse of Qing, Opium Wars, Boxer Rebellion, I think it's called. Is it military history only? No, I can do history about other things. It's just oftentimes that... Okay, I'm gonna stereotype you guys a little bit. You guys are generally more interested in war and conflict because you're gamers. No offense. But a lot of you guys are probably more interested in learning about violence than, I don't know, cultural history, let's say. Yes, you do like war. Not true, such slander. Apologies. Says the Warhammer streamer. Hey, look, it's a fun game. All of your suggestions have been religious oriented. I know. Like, you guys, there are some really good suggestions so far. I'm not going to remember all of them, just off the top of my head. So I'll try and get that sorted. I don't know when the next one will happen. It'd be nice if I can apply for the front page for it again. Hello, front page of Twitch. Everyone say in chat, say hi to the front page. It was very nice. Thank you very much, Twitch, for putting me on the front page. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, we'll just have a regular stream from now on. So it'd be good for the next one if I was also on the front page. I won't object, guys. Front page sucks. Yeah, oh, I guess I should introduce myself for the people who are from the front page. Hi, my name's Cleo. I am a VTuber. I live in Australia. I used to be involved in academia, so I worked in a university in Australia, teaching history. And at the same time, I started doing VTubing as a fun way to stream and talk about history in a way that, you know, didn't mean that I could lose my job if someone clipped me out of context, which history has lots of moments where I can get clipped out of context when talking about it. That's why I chose to be a VTuber. And eventually, because the university sector in Australia, along with, well, the university sector, I think, in many parts of the Western developed world is just complete shambles right now. Unfortunately, I lost my job, and I just committed full-time into streaming, and here we are. So I have a lot of fun. I play a lot of history games and strategy games. That's sort of my bread and butter, but I do a lot of other things, and of course, I do these history lectures. If you are new to my history lectures, you can check them out on my YouTube. If you just search my name, Cleo IT, on YouTube, you can see the history lecture for the Fourth Crusade. There's one about the War of the League of Cambrai. What else have we got? There's the Troubles. And finally, this Emu War one, which will be going on YouTube soon. I forgot to do a slash marker. Sorry, let me just do a slash marker.